The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a privilege to follow the member for Scullin in this place, a decent man who gave what I consider to be a passionate speech. However, in this place, Madam Deputy Speaker, we don't only give a speech based on our heart, we need to give a speech based on our head. And I stand here as somebody who is concerned about problem gambling. I don't like the prevalence of pokies in our clubs, in our pubs and our casinos, and I never will. In fact, the Productivity Commission has found that 600,000 Australians play the pokies on a weekly basis, of which 15% of them, some 90,000 Australians, are problem gamblers. That is too many. And the fact that there are 200,000 electronic gaming machines across the country is a significant number. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, in this place we need to advocate for good policy. Good policy which is efficient, effective and produces real outcomes. Not policy that just makes us feel good and that we are making on the basis of political weakness or some grand political bargain. I have no doubt that the member for Denison passionately believes in this cause. In fact, the Senator Xenophon in the Senate and the member for Denison and many others like them are only pursuing for them what they consider a vital issue. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am asked to speak and to vote on the legislation before this House. And this is not good legislation. In fact, this is rushed legislation. It might surprise people to know, listening to this broadcast, that there was only 1 week that was given for consultation for this legislation. 1 week for submissions for this legislation. There needs to be a proper inquiry. We need to allow the states whose powers are being usurped with this legislation the opportunity to properly consider the implications of this legislation. In fact, that is what COAG is about. It's a body that brings the Commonwealth and the states and the territories together to consider legislation such as this. And it doesn't surprise me that Senator Xenophon, someone who is so passionate about the issue of problem gambling, has said that he is voting against this legislation. Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to trace the origins of what the legislation we have before us. And it all started at the election on the 21st of August 2010, when the Prime Minister, the now Prime Minister of this country, did not have the numbers on the floor of this House to form a government. So what did she do? She reached out to the independents to get their vote. And the member for Denison responded in kind. He put requests in for hundreds of millions of dollars of government money, of taxpayers' money for his electorate. And he struck a deal, what he considered to be a deal with the Prime Minister, in which he was promised your government's commitment to mandatory pre-commitment. And it's there in paragraph 7.5 on a document agreed by the Prime Minister of Australia. An agreement which says that this government will commit to implementing in full a mandatory pre-commitment policy. And then it was presented to the Australian people after no consideration, no consultation, as a fait accompli. And I am a member of the task force or the working group or the parliamentary committee that's been asked to look at this mandatory pre-commitment idea. And so we did. And we heard from expert witnesses like Alexander Blazinski, Professor Alexander Blazinski, Director of the University of Sydney's Gambling Treatment Clinic and Research Unit, who warned the unintended negative consequence of introducing pre-commitment devices is the development of a black market in player cards, whereby player cards be sold or hired to players who have exceeded their personal limits. Another submission highlighted, and I quote, Nova Scotia in Canada discovered that 37% of players shared their player pre-commitment cards for periods up to a week. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, there we have it, the Prime Minister of Australia agreeing, in writing, to a mandatory pre-commitment scheme in order to win the vote for the member for Denison, but which has been criticised and critiqued by leading professors. And it was only be with an Orwellian Big Brother biometric identifier that we would be able to put in place some effective pre-commitment system. But despite all these concerns, these legitimate concerns by experts in the field, the Prime Minister proceeded with this mandatory pre-commitment idea. But then things started to get rough. The waters started to get rough. The political climate started to turn. And the Prime Minister had members on her own side, like the member for Eden Monaro, who came out and criticised this mandatory pre-commitment idea. The member for Eden Monaro said that he had 97 clubs in his electorate, a bellwether seat for the Labor Party, or for this parliament, and said, we need a solution that won't kill our clubs. And suddenly you had members from the other side, like deers or rabbits in a headlight, going out to public forums in their electorates where thousands of people expressed their concern with these mandatory pre-commitment ideas. And so then we had the successor to the carbon tax bat flip, the border protection bat flip, then we had the mandatory pre-commitment backflip. And our Prime Minister changed her tune. She went out, and I quote, and said, suddenly, the circumstances of this parliament are clear. There is not the support in the House of Representatives for the Andrew Wilkie plan. Hang on. You agreed to Andrew Wilkie's plan. You signed an agreement to Andrew Wilkie's plan, a contract with him. But when the political waters started to get rough, you backed out. Jenny Macklin, Minister for Families. We have to work with the parliament that we have. Come on. Come on. You made a deal. You led the Australian people into a deal that you were going to deliver mandatory pre-commitment. Then Mr Wilkie, the member for Denison, came out and said, I regard the Prime Minister to be in breach of the written agreement she signed, leaving me no option but to honour my word and end my current relationship with her government. Well, therefore, the member for Wilkie is a man of his word, but the Prime Minister is not. But I'm going to leave the daddy of them all was what Senator Xenophon, a man who's passionate about this issue, said. And he said, Julia Gillard has shown a written signed agreement with her is as worthless as her word. In fact, you have to wonder how the remaining independents can trust any assurances they receive from the Prime Minister. Miss Gillard, it seems, reserves the right to back out of anything if it suits her immediate political interest. And this is all a quote from Senator Xenophon. Don't be fooled by her pathetic claims that she is adopting any real reform. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, there we have it. The Prime Minister saying suddenly the mood in the Parliament's changed. And there we have it, Andrew Wilkie backing out of that deal because the Prime Minister did first. And there we have it, Senator Xenophon saying, don't be fooled by her pathetic claims that she is adopting any real reform. No wonder the Prime Minister propped up the member for Fisher, the then Speaker Peter Slipper. No wonder the Prime Minister propped up Craig Thompson, the member for DeBell. It was all about getting the numbers. getting the numbers to roll Andrew Wilkie. That's what you're about. Political expediency. You don't care about the problem gamblers.
Order.
And Madam Deputy Speaker, we have before this House legislation which will do three things. It will require that new machines required or imported from the end of 2013 be capable of supporting pre-commitment. It will require all gaming machines that are part of a statewide pre-commitment system and display electronic warnings by 2016 with longer implementation timelines for smaller venues, and it will require a $250 a day ATM withdrawal limit for gaming venues other than casinos. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have concerns with this legislation. As I said at the start, when we come into this parliament, our job is not to support feel-good policies, it's to support good policies. Policies that produce real outcomes for the Australian people. And what we have in this legislation before this House are bills that provide insufficient time for consultation or review. They will have an impact on employment in the hospitality sector, and they'll be particularly acute for the regional and rural areas. There is a lack of time for implementation of these new measures, and there will be a major cost burden for implementation measures. There are going to be significant hardware and software upgrades. And we have heard from constitutional experts that there is a concern that gambling is within the prerogative of the states, and this is firmly placing it in the prerogative of the federal parliament. And we have yet to see direct causality between ATMs and problem gambling. In fact, the Gaming Technologies Australia, which is the sole body of expertise in this industry, said categorically the timelines in this bill cannot be met. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said at the start, I am concerned about problem gambling. 90,000 problem gamblers, as recorded by the Productivity Commission, is too many. And we heard from people whose lives have been ruined by gambling. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are asked to vote on the legislation before this House. And we are asked to think about how can we best improve the lives of problem gamblers. And I can tell you it was never going to be the mandatory pre-commitment policy that was first agreed to by the Prime Minister and the member for Denison. And we heard expert testimony to that effect. It was never going to be. But that did not excuse the Prime Minister and the Labor government from ratting on that deal simply because it didn't suit their political purposes. We need more harm minimisation measures. I'm all for that. In fact, one-on-one counselling for people who are in need is so important. But what we need to do is we need to breed greater responsibility at a personal level in our community. And we need to get help for those people who can't help themselves. But what we have, Madam Deputy Speaker, before us in this legislation today is a top-down solution for what is a bottom-up problem. And my fear is that with this government, we have seen so many backflips and turns, we have seen so many costly mistakes, that the Australian people no longer trust the bona fides of this government to deliver for them what should be good policy that is in the national interest. So we do, Madam Deputy Speaker, need to help problem gamblers. We need to find a better way But that does not mean we support bad legislation.